Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. I'm Susan James, Library Manager here at Bayless Library and Assistant Director of the Superior District Library. First of all, I'd like to thank Adam Schuitema for coming tonight, the Friends of Bayless Library for the refreshments and for help with book selling, and the Chippewa County Historical Society for the lobby display case. I'll have to show it to you later. As well as library staff for planning and setup. I wanted to mention a couple events coming up. Anne-Marie Ullman, a past Michigan notable author, will be here next week. She'll be teaching a memoir writing workshop on Thursday, 3 to 5 p.m. And at 7 p.m. she'll talk about her new book, Love, Sex, and 4-H. And we just added an author. On June 23rd, Joe Haskey from Cedarville will be here. And he'll be speaking about his new anthology called Stray Dogs, New Fiction, Writing from the Other America. That's new as of tonight. Other flyers are on the back table as well as our newsletters. It's an honor for me to introduce Adam Schuitema, who's visiting our community as part of the Library of Michigan's 2016 Michigan Notable Books Author Tour. Every year, the Michigan Notable Books program chooses 20 outstanding fiction and nonfiction books written about Michigan or by a Michigan author and published the previous calendar year. I encourage you to check the complete 2016 list printed on the bookmark you found on your seat. There's some wonderful books about Michigan on the list. For more information on the Michigan Notable Books program and to review prior year's lists, visit www.michigan.gov/notablebooks. This year, several authors will visit 50 libraries throughout the state during April, May, and June. Bayless Public Library was fortunate to have been selected as a tour stop this year. These free presentations are brought to you by the Library of Michigan, Michigan Department of Education, Michigan Humanities Council, the Library of Michigan Foundation, Meyer, and the Michigan Center for the Book. Media sponsors are City Pulse Dome, Q Advertising, and Genera Photography. We want to thank these sponsors for making this program possible through their generous support. The Michigan Humanities Council has asked that you fill out the survey that was placed on your chair and let them know if it was worthwhile for you to attend tonight's session. You may fill it out and leave it in the basket at the back of the room.
That's a lot of pressure. I better give it my all. Can't afford to do. That's right.
Oh, sure.
It's like student evaluation.
Adam Schuitema earned his MFA and PhD from Western Michigan University and is an associate professor of English at Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids. He's the author of the novel Haymaker, set in the UP, and the short story collection Freshwater Boys. Both were named Michigan Notable Books by the Library of Michigan. Tonight he'll speak about his 2016 Michigan Notable book, Haymaker. Copies of his books are available for purchase and signing after this event. Please welcome Adam Schuitema.
You know, in the world of small press publishing, in the world of independent bookstores, in the world of libraries, it might, something even like this might seem like a small thing, but it's an important thing, and it's sort of how we, who are published by small presses and stuff, this is how we oftentimes sell things. It's word of mouth, it's librarians, it's independent booksellers saying, I heard him speak, and or somebody recommends it, passes it along. So this means a great deal, and thank you very much. Thanks to Susan for inviting and coordinating this, and thanks to you for attending tonight. I spent a lot of time in the Upper Peninsula while working on this book, especially in the Grand Marais area. But this is my first literary event in the UP for kind of promoting this book, so I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I've always been a bit nervous about it too, that somehow when I was working on it, I was nervous about, you know, people I know who have connections to the UP, are they in any way going to say, well, especially since the book is so much about like outsiders coming in, and I oftentimes felt like one, like, am I going to be seen as some sort of fraud for trying to write about it, even if it's in a fictional town? So I'll talk more about that in a minute. When the book came out a little over a year ago, people would ask me what it was about, and I would describe kind of the political conflict at the story's core, and they would say something, you know, they'd be excited, and they would say, oh, that sounds like really relevant to the political world today. And then a year later, when they ask what it's about, and I find myself hesitating, and I say, politics. And you can just sort of wait for their reaction as they just have a glazed look, and they just say, that sounds really relevant to our political world today. You know, there's already an exhaustion factor politically. And I'm realizing how difficult it can be to discuss fiction in any way that deals with politics, because no matter what form it's in, whether it's meant to be kind of very realistic or whether it's more fantastical, that we think of fiction as on some level a form of escapism. And the problem is that one of the things that people most want to escape these days is politics. So how do you invite them into a fictional world in a novel where there's a political element to it? And one of my students, when he recently asked me what it was about, and I told him, he goes, I just need a book with magic or something in it. So, so can you create a book of politics with any sort of spark of magic in it? And as a writer, you hope so, if only through the characters and the landscapes and the experience of the narrative journey. I think what I'm going to do tonight, because I've been in your position where I've listened to somebody, you know, read a long stretch of a book, is I think I'm going to break it up a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and the writing of the novel, including some of the real life elements that inspired it, and then I'll read a section, and then I'll talk a little bit more, and then I'll read one more short section. Because of the, as they talk about on cable news, you know, the historically low favorability numbers between the two leading presidential candidates, there's been a lot of talk about how the Libertarian Party this year is especially hoping to make significant national gains, and certain polls have shown Gary Johnson, I parked behind somebody on the street earlier today with a bumper sticker, polling at maybe as high as 10% kind of nationally as the Libertarian Party presidential candidate. And he's been getting a lot of more coverage and a certain, you know, higher amount of credibility than maybe in years past. And the Libertarian Party held its presidential convention in Orlando this past weekend, and it was getting a fair amount of press because of the things I mentioned, but it was sort of overshadowed by an event toward the very end where one of the Libertarian members was on stage, and this was being filmed live on C-SPAN as some sort of, it wasn't even a protest, it was just a matter of a dare, stripped himself down to his underwear and was being booed off the stage. So as with this book, so often the more kind of rational, pragmatic members of this party and of this political philosophy find themselves being undercut by the eccentric and extreme. And again, that's one of the things that really plays a part in Haymaker. In 2001, a political theorist named Jason Sorens wrote this manifesto outlining his plan, which was to move a large number of libertarians and sort of libertarian-minded people to a single location, so that instead of their numbers and their political clout being watered down over all 50 states, let's concentrate them in one area, in one state, and let's see if they can enact real change. And again, these libertarians would be people who, politically speaking, they prized small government and individual liberty, less taxation, more privatization, and less punishment of what they saw as victimless crimes. And in 2004, this project kicked off, and it was called the Free State Project. And they created this mission of recruiting 20,000 people who they called liberty-loving individuals to move to the state of New Hampshire. And New Hampshire makes sense for a lot of obvious reasons if you're trying to do something like this. One, it's quite small, so 20,000 people is going to be, especially if they're 20,000 active and excited voters, is going to make a real difference politically. Two, when your motto as a state is live free or die, you kind of already have the pedigree that they might be looking for. And it received a fair amount of positive press early on, and they were pretty good at marketing themselves. They even had a logo for the Free State Project, which was a porcupine, kind of cute little label, and it was sort of meant to be that, you know, they were harmless creatures if left alone, but if you messed with them, you were going to get stung by its quills, right? So, and an offshoot of the Free State Project was this Free Town Project, which specifically hoped to gather a large number of individuals into a single community and start exacting change even faster. And the town was called Grafton, in I think the center of the state. And again, this was in 2004, and I was in graduate school down at Western at the time. And the country was sort of knee-deep in the presidential election of George W. Bush and John Kerry. And I couldn't imagine a kind of crazier, more contentious political atmosphere, which I was clearly an idiot. You know, I needed only to have waited 12 more years for this historic election, but I digress. And I was in the process of finishing the manuscript for my first book, Freshwater Boys, and I was eager to start a new writing project. And I had decided, I had originally said I'm never going to write a novel. I don't know how people can write novels, they're too long. And then my stories got to be 25 pages long, 28 pages. I wrote like a 44-page story, and my professor's like, just write the novel. You know you're going to write a novel. And but I didn't have an idea for a novel. I had some interesting character sketches, character types, unique, eccentric individuals, but I couldn't figure out how on earth all these different characters would somehow find themselves in the same narrative world. So I was looking for that, and I was sitting in my car because I would commute from Grand Rapids, and I would teach a class earlier, and then I'd have one of my own night classes, so I would just be hanging around campus. I think I was sitting in my car eating like a sack, you know, lunch or dinner before class, and I was listening to NPR, and it was All Things Considered, and they were covering the story about in New Hampshire, in Grafton, about the Free Town Project. And they were describing the organization's plan as I kind of outlined it for you, but it turns out that the townspeople of Grafton were having none of it. That even though many of them may have been sympathetic politically, philosophically to what the people were doing, the thought of hundreds or even thousands of outsiders pouring in and staying and really changing their very way of life really struck a nerve. So at the NPR story, they were there on the night of this contentious town hall meeting. And what was going to happen was an individual named Tim Condon, who was a spokesperson for the Freetown Project, and was going to speak in front of the town and kind of outline their plans. And he seemed like, as they interviewed him, a pretty intelligent, rational individual. But the story also described the guy sort of behind the movement, the sort of financial backer, who was this sort of shady individual named Zach Bass, who apparently that wasn't his real name. And he was involved in a lot of kind of shady business ventures might be too kind of a phrase. I think one of them was a mail order bride service. So the NPR story was covering this town hall meeting where Tim Condon was going to try to explain to the town the group's plans and kind of put them at ease and kind of project a reasonable persona and ethos. And local interest was so great that they couldn't have it in the normal, it was probably a room like this, they couldn't have it in the normal town hall room. They had to back the fire truck out of the garage bay of the firehouse and set up steel chairs, and they filled the fire station for this thing. And the meeting did not go well for the Porcupines. As Condon and the others were trying to kind of rationally explain the plans, the angry townspeople were shouting them down. And afterward, NPR interviewed Condon, and he had this sort of, tremor and waver in his voice, sort of like a man kind of figuratively shell-shocked. And again, presidential politics was already in the air in 2004, and it were on my mind, and I was trying to come up with this idea for a novel. And so when I heard this concept, this premise of these two worlds colliding in Grafton, I thought, I think that's an idea for my novel. And if I look at all these characters I have who seem very different from one another, well, if some of them are from this town and some of them are outsiders coming from all over the country, then I think I can make this work. So I started writing Haymaker in 2004, and it just came out last year. When I started it, my daughter was like a few months old. And she was at my book launch party last year, and she was finishing 5th grade, so it was a long process. And during those years, a remarkable thing occurred, which was that this thread of libertarianism, though it was sort of mutating into different forms, was starting to go more mainstream. And here I was writing about characters who were protesting and dressing up like the founding fathers and waving the yellow rattlesnake of the Gadsden, "Don't tread on me" flag. And soon scenes like this were popping up on the news more and more. And you had the rise of the Tea Party and other movements. And as a novelist, this terrified me because I was convinced someone else was going to write this novel before I did, right? Like, you're talking about it too much. Somebody's going to have this idea, and it's taking me too long to write it. It's taking me too long to find a publisher. But luckily, I don't think anybody else did. Because the Free Town Project and the Free State Project weren't alone, and haven't been alone when it comes to this idea of a libertarian utopia. Just last year, and this was announced the same week that my book came out, in Europe, there was a libertarian politician and activist from the Czech Republic who proclaimed the establishment of a micronation called Liberland, I think, which translates to Liberty Land, on a small section of disputed land on the Danube River between Serbia and Croatia. And in the first week of announcing he wanted to form this nation, this libertarian nation, he received 200,000 applications for citizenship from around the world. And these utopian dreams have always kind of existed in all these different forms. There are movements when it comes to international waters right now. There's a movement called the seasteading movement, like homesteads, but seasteads, people who want to build floating cities in international waters outside of any jurisdiction of any country. Back in 1964, Ernest Hemingway's brother claimed his own micronation off the coast of Jamaica. His nation was an 8 by 30 foot raft. He called it New Atlantis, and a storm sunk it. There's an old episode, I don't know if any of you are Simpsons fans, but there's an old episode of The Simpsons where, because of the blue laws on Sunday, Homer wants to buy beer on Sunday morning and he can't in Springfield, so he takes his boss's yacht out to international waters to buy some beer. All of this is a way of saying, as I get to the novel more specifically, is that there's something incredibly alluring about this idea, especially I think something so very American about pulling up stakes, moving to a new frontier, starting from scratch, and creating what we think is going to be the perfect living environment. And of course, it almost never turns out as we planned and as we hoped. So, like all fiction, Haymaker is a blend of real life and make-believe. I took the scenario of Grafton as a template, and I took the main goals of the Free Town Project and kind of created my own version of it. Instead of the porcupines, my group is called the Black Bears, same concept, that they generally, though they might look frightening, are peaceful and don't want to mind you any business, but don't cross them. Instead of the Free Town Project, I called them the Freedom Community. And I had a character who, like this Tim Condon individual, was sort of the rational spokesperson for the group, but also there's a kind of shady guy behind it who's pulling the strings and who has the financial backing in a shady past. And that detail of the meeting in the fire station I just thought was so good that I stole that. That's the one part where I just kind of lifted it. I'm like, I'm gonna have there's gonna be a moment of a town hall meeting, and I'm gonna have it, and then they're gonna pull the fire truck out and have it there. I didn't set it in New Hampshire though, because it's one of the states I've never been to. Realistically, it would make far more sense if you were going to do this in a smaller state like New Hampshire. But I took poetic license and I set it in Michigan. And I wanted to set it. I'd been spending some time occasionally, again, going up to Grand Marais and little things like that. And I just thought, in terms of kind of the ruggedly beautiful landscape and the kind of brand of rugged individualism, I decided to set it in the Upper Peninsula. And I named the town itself Haymaker. It is basically set where like Deer Park would be. So it was, in many ways, I kind of geographically imagined it like Grand Marais, but it's meant to be sort of between Grand Marais and Whitefish Point. And I fictionalized basically everything. I created my own street names, my own town names, still set it on the real Lake Superior. You're not going to come up with something better than that in fiction. And again, I would say about 80% of it was meant to seem like, yes, I'm going to really capture the place. And 20% of it is, I'm going to have some fun and some leeway, and I'm going to make the town and its citizens a bit more eccentric and a bit more interesting than usual. So it's not meant to capture the essence of your typical, Upper Peninsula town, and I feel like I especially need to say that when I'm up here. It's meant to be kind of an eccentric small town that could exist in any relatively kind of isolated sparsely populated part of the country. And again, most of the people I know who have UP roots were really excited about it, really liked it. I went online, people could just post their own reviews on things like Amazon, and one woman who's clearly from the UP was very upset that I didn't talk more about the mosquitoes. Like, I'm sorry. I mentioned black flies at some time, but she was like, and she didn't like that a couple of my characters say the word ain't so much. She's like, that's not how people in UP talk. And it wasn't meant to be. It was just, I wanted a character, that's just how he talks. So I'm gonna read this really brief prologue to kind of set things up, and then talk a bit more briefly, and then I'm going to read a scene, the one that is based on the firehouse scene. So this is just a little prologue that sounds pretty different from the rest of the book, but just kind of setting things up. The county highway climbs an upland just south of town, and for a minute or two there above the tree line, you witness God's view of this place people call God's country. A cloud bank approaches from the west, but most of the sky remains startlingly blue. It's July, and for up here, hot. A rich shade of green cloaks the land below. Summer's brief in the north, but here it is, and there are leaves. The green stretches in all directions, but to the north it ends at a distant white ribbon that runs unspooled along its edge. This is the shore, the sand reflecting the sun. It marks the start of that other blue, the lake, which reaches north to meet and become the horizon, and then drown it. The road descends, pushing northward. The forest stubbornly gives way to a rigid geometry, the skeleton of almost all American towns, a grid of paved roads, and on the outskirts, a few that are still dirt. After the skeleton comes the skin, houses and businesses where early settlers carved space from woods with blades fresh from the whetstone. Cars and trucks roll through its streets. People saunter down its sidewalks. On the main street, and there's always one, the spine of these American towns, is a man with a camera taking pictures. On the opposite sidewalk, a girl pushes a stroller and spies on him. Take this town and suspend it in time. Hold it with laced fingers like the worker holds the trapped sparrow he's found in the fireplace. Then store the memory away. This town's about to change. So as an artist, I hope as much as possible to kind of disappear amid the pages of the book, which is to say, if I do it right in fiction, the reader will get lost in the fictional dream of the narrative and not be thinking of the person who's setting the sentences and the words in front of them. And I know, unless it's some postmodern work, I as a reader don't want to read a novel where I'm overly aware of the author's presence in the manipulation of the story any more than I want to see the strings of a puppeteer, right? Which makes it especially difficult when you're writing a novel that has politics at its central conflict, but is not meant to be a political novel. I wanted the story, politically speaking, to be even-handed. I wanted the characters, good or bad, to speak for themselves, and as the novel kind of builds up to this showdown between both sides, I wanted to convey it where some of the people on both sides are noble and some of them on both sides are shameful, what they do at least. So the story follows characters on both sides, but it kind of is an ensemble piece with 6 characters at their core. And I think this part I'm about to read is the only scene in the entire book where all 6 are under one roof at the same time. There's a lot of characters in this part that I'm going to read to you, but that's fine. Don't feel like you're meant to follow that all, because you're meant to kind of feel overwhelmed because it's the town hall meeting that's overflowing, and it's meant to kind of be over the top, and It's the one, like I said, I adapted from the story. The fire truck is out by the curb. Here are the main kind of people that you need to know for what I'm going to read. First is Clara, who is the owner of a local diner, and she's also the town's mayor. So she is kind of at the center of this town council meeting, kind of running it. And she's also very pregnant at this moment in the story. There's Joseph, who is the representative from the Freedom community, and he is there to communicate the group's plan and to put away any concerns or fears that the town has. And his assistant Carl is with him. Then you have the two most eccentric characters in the book. Again, two of those characters that before I knew what the novel was going to be, I knew I was going to somehow have these two guys. One is a guy named Roosevelt Bly, who is just about 80 years old at the time that we're picking it up here. And he's eccentric, he's wealthy, very wealthy. Nobody in town really knows why. He owns this kind of lives in this old lumber baron mansion, sort of apart from the town with the lake, with the view of the lake. And he's been living in Haymaker for 30 years, but he's still seen very much as a kind of outsider. And he wears almost a kind of, as a uniform, white Western wear all the time. He wears a white cowboy hat, white cowboy boots, and lots of gold jewelry. He's based on a guy who saw at the mall once. That's another story. And then there's a guy named Donnie, who is this sort of angry local who he hates outsiders, and so much so that every year he holds this annual event where he challenges one outsider who's decided to live in the town. He challenges them to a kind of duel of fist fights. So that's partly how you get this card here. He's the one who says ain't a lot too. In the actual book, especially, I'm going to read, I like to read scenes when I read to a group like this with a lot of dialogue, because it has more of a sense of kind of the stage and of theater. But it's usually at times of conflict when people are angry, so they're oftentimes swearing a lot. So I always, when I'm reading in a library or something, I make sure I kind of change some of the words to make it more PG. So if you read the book, you get the uncut, unedited version here. So this is picking up a little bit as this town council meeting is about to start. Mayor Hollinshead and the 6 council members entered through a side door and settled down a long cafeteria-style table up front. Microphones were set up in front of each chair, but the table was a plain wooden podium, and in the center aisle that bisected the audience stood a lone microphone stand where residents could voice their questions and concerns. See, I like reading this part with a microphone because I can use it as a prop as this goes on too. A rush of applause greeted the council members when they entered, as if they were the town's defenders from invasion, or at the very least, the home team stepping onto the court. Ash kept quiet, her hands in her jacket pockets. Mayor Hollings had immediately spoken to her microphone. Order, people, this isn't a pep rally, it's a civic gathering. Let's also make it a civil gathering. The eyes of the council members flanking her darted back and forth, scanning the crowd. The meeting began like any other. They covered the previous meeting's minutes and then turned to various issues of small town governance, like installing a flashing stoplight at Marquette and Schoolcraft, or pruning tree limbs along Juneau that were interfering with the power lines. The crowd would have none of this, and a rising dissent bubbled up as they mumbled and shook their heads. Councilwoman Rita Gumpert, owner of Rita's Floral and Gift, spoke up. Mayor, I move we proceed right to the debate regarding the Freedom community. Cheers and applause thundered throughout the crammed firehouse. I second, sir, Ernest Mears. Clara turned her head. All in favor? Everyone agreed. The ayes have it, she said, resting her hands on her belly and sighing loudly into the microphone. Let's begin. Joseph opened the side door with a loud metallic snap. He strode into the garage with Carl behind him, toward 2 chairs in the front row marked reserved. People craned their necks. A swell of chatter followed. A couple of people booed, and Donnie cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, "Aliens, go home!" People, people, shouted Mayor Hollings. It's citizens! Joseph followed her eyes to the 2 tense-looking cops at the door, as if she were about to signal something to them, but she only shook her head slightly, and the cops relaxed. Joseph sat down, a remarkable calm having settled over him. This was his job, what he'd worked and prepared for, and he was ready. He wore a sharp gray suit and smoothed his blue tie over his chest. Carl sat upright, his fists clenched and jaw rigid. 2 weeks earlier, he proposed to his girlfriend, Marissa. Haymaker was going to be their home, where they'd start a family. He stared straight ahead at the council, refusing to acknowledge the crowd behind him. This council will now address the issue of the freedom community, said Mayor Hollingshead. I suppose that's why most of you are here. Please forgive us for the overcrowding. Consider it a wonderful exercise in civic participation. The firehouse fell silent, anxious for the debate. I'd like to welcome Mr. Joseph Novak and Mr. Carl Farmer, representatives of, a few people booed, of citizens, of representatives of the freedom community who will hopefully provide us with more specifics regarding their potential move to Haymaker. I expect a lively democratic experience tonight, plenty of discussion, and a fair amount of disagreement. But here's something we must all agree on right now. The mayor leaned forward, removing her hands from her belly and pressing them down on the table. All opinions will be respected and all will be heard through the proper procedures. Any more outbursts, anything like that, and you're gone. She nodded toward the police presence near the door while still looking at the crowd. You're gone. Joseph took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Let me now recognize the group's communication director, Joseph Novak. Joseph stood, nodded in appreciation at the mayor, and then stepped forward to the podium. Carl approached the front as well, setting up a shaky wooden easel and several large panels of foam core before returning to his seat. Joseph nodded again, this time at the townspeople. To go along with what Mayor Hollingshead said, let me thank all of you for this incredible turnout tonight. One of the reasons our organization chose to make Haymaker our home out of all the towns in the United States is its undeniable spirit of democracy. Voter turnout's remarkable here. There's nothing worse than a politically apathetic community, and Haymaker is certainly not that. He smiled generously, aware that in his suit he must look like a politician himself. That's just one of the many reasons why we chose this place. He held up a copy of the Haymaker at a Glance brochure. This is something that I've written for libertarians interested in making the move. It describes this town as I've come to see it with fresh eyes, and I think you'll find it a very pleasing and complimentary portrait. In my short amount of time spent here, I've fallen in love with this town. A skeptical murmur rippled throughout the crowd. Carl here will leave a stack of these brochures after the meeting, and we encourage everyone to read what we have to say about this place. I think it'll help lessen any fears that you might have that we're somehow out to invade Haymaker or dramatically change it in any way. The fact is, we already like most of it as it is. What do you mean, most of it? A woman shouted. Order, said the mayor. Citizens! Let's hear him out, yelled Bud Willington. Many turned in his direction. Joseph glanced at Roosevelt, who was in the third row and easily noticeable in his customary white. The gold-plated cowboy wore a tense expression and shook his head ever so slightly. Joseph remembered their conversation weeks earlier, Roosevelt's warning about sounding preachy and self-righteous. I apologize, that came out wrong. What I mean is that every town, even the most picturesque ones like Haymaker, have things that could be improved. Just like people, no town is perfect. In addition to the aforementioned brochure, Carl will also have some literature that describes libertarian ideas in general and our freedom community goals more specifically. These ideas might be new to some of you, but others I suspect already know quite a bit. In fact, I know some of you already consider yourselves libertarians. Some of you voted libertarian in both the presidential and midterm elections, and though some of you may never have considered yourselves as such, you'll likely find that your core beliefs about limited government and individual rights match up with ours. The earlier ripple of skepticism now grew into a wave of discord. People turned to those next to them. I'm not a libertarian. Are you libertarian? I'm not a libertarian. Joseph shook his head, angry at himself. So what are you saying here? Ray Valentine stood up. Joseph remembered him from Donnie's fight. Are you saying you're here to liberate us? Joseph recognized the trap, the implied language of war. He wouldn't take the bait. And then Carl shot up, his face red, his hands still clenched. He turned and stared at Ray, at the whole town, and said, yes, that's exactly what we're saying. Joseph took a step back and covered his chest the way his mom would when she used to be shocked. Carl sat down again, his arms crossed. He looked at Joseph and smiled. A foaming uproar surged through the crowd like breaking waves. That's enough, shouted the mayor. Joseph leaned again toward the podium. Think of the economic boom, he yelled. A hush slowly descended over the townspeople. He sensed them listening now and remembered the faded Save the Mill signs around the town. He made sure to mention businesses by name. More shoppers at the 3F, more diners at the Venison, more patrons at the mayor's own Shipwreck Cafe. Someone broke the crowd's silence. "You're a shipwreck." It was a woman in her 70s who couldn't have been over 4'10", "and you're gonna take this whole town down with you." "Ma'am, that's both untrue and unfair." "To hell with fairness," said a large bearded man in the second row. "You put people's backs to the wall and then act surprised when they bite and claw away." The mayor stood up, stunned. "Gary." That's her husband. He shrugged his shoulders at her and sat down. "Let's move quickly to the specifics," said Joseph, "and then you can take turns asking me questions." He stepped to the easel, he shuffled through the panels, and then spoke quickly, aware of a rising heat under his skin, sweat trickling down his back. There were pie charts, demographics, bullet points, and facts that left his mouth and died on his lips. It wasn't until he revealed the artist's rendering that people perked up and strained their necks to see. This was it, the freedom community as it would look when all the stumps were ground to dust and all the libertarians began to arrive. Rows of white condominiums, green yards and hanging flower baskets, American flags flying from every porch. When we speak of a freedom community, we're referring to two distinct things. First, this, an actual neighborhood, a community within the larger community of Haymaker. "You're creating a compound," said an old man in the front row. "A commune." He turned to the old woman next to him and mumbled, "I know his type." Carl spoke politely. "Earl, please, we can't have interruptions." "I assure you it's no commune," said Joseph. "It's a place for people to get settled, to get grounded. It's a way station. Then they'll buy or build their own houses. Of course, some will move into a house right away. My family will, because freedom community in the second sense refers to Haymaker as a whole. Those of us who settle here have no interest in being fenced off from the rest of the town. We want to integrate into it, truly be your neighbors." "What if we want to fence you in ourselves?" yelled Ray Valentine with a huge grin. "What if we want to put bars around you and poke at you with sticks like a bunch of animals?" "Get him out of here," yelled the mayor. The chief nodded toward the back of the firehouse, and a young blonde officer, who'd gone all but unnoticed at the back of the wall, made his way through the chairs, grabbed Ray by his arm, and escorted him through a door to the other part of the Civic Center. The place erupted, and for the first time all night, a hairline fracture, the slightest of schisms, crept through the haymakes. Many cheered for Ray, others booed, happy to see him go, and the rest seemed to press their collective hands against their collective ears, like panicky children whose parents were fighting. Then Donnie stood up. The woman in uniform, whom Joseph also recognized from Donnie's earlier fight, took a step forward but then stopped with her thumbs hooked in her gun belt and simply watched him like everyone else. He smiled and slowly inched his way through his row until he reached the center aisle and the microphone stand. "Is it question time yet?" he asked. "No," said the mayor. "Yes," said Joseph, "it's fine." He returned Donnie's smile, suddenly emboldened, and nodded toward him. "Shoot." "Oh, I will." The mayor spoke again. "Donnie, you know the rules, and you know the consequences, and you know how much is on the line right now." "More than anyone," he said. He turned toward the two cops by the door and gave a little wave. "Evening, officers." He looked around the room. "Good friends of mine. We go way back. Much history." His smile then eroded like a dune, imperceptibly, grain by grain. "I know a lot of you people think I'm a joke, though you'd never say it to my face. I'm all inked up and I curse a lot and I like to fight, so you think you probably have me all figured out. But believe me, and I'm saying this now." He shook his index finger in the air. "I am saying this. You have never really seen me fight. Don't ask me why I feel the way I do about all this, about people coming here and changing things to fit their likes and needs. Just don't ask. But believe me, I feel it." Donnie took a deep breath, smiled once more, and stared at Joseph. "Did you know this guy's daddy was a communist?" He nodded. "Yeah, he's not the only one smart enough to do research." "Do you have an actual question, Donnie?" asked Clara. Joseph stayed silent and returned Donnie's stare. "Yes, Mayor, but not for him, for everyone else." He removed the microphone from the stand and turned around, surveying his fellow haymakes. "A soldier going off to war knows he might get shot or blown up, but if he's brave, he still goes. Our friend here says he knows some of you are libertarians and that you're on his side, whether you'll admit it out loud or not. Well, I know deep down, a lot of you feel more like me than you'd care to admit. You're angry to the point of bad things. So my question is, are you going to fight back?" He swung around toward Joseph. "You're here trying to recruit, eh? Fine, here's your competition. You bring your army, I'll bring mine." Cheers, boos, and whistles rained down on the meeting. The mayor shouted for order, but now people stood and yelled amongst themselves. Roosevelt Bly, a month shy of his 80th birthday. realized I've lost my spot. Bedecked in white from head to toe, stood up on his chair, waving his arms. "This is quite enough," he shouted. "Find your seats and plant your butts. This is a town hall meeting, not a jailbreak." The storm ebbed under the sight of this man who shone like a full moon. "We are good, civil people in this town," he said, lowering his voice, and as the room fell silent, the tone of that voice took on that of a lullaby. "That's right, we're all back now, back from the brink. This is communication, this is civilization." He stretched his open hands around him. "We are free to agree or disagree with these visitors and their ideas, but to act like savages is to act like Haymakers, not really a town at all, not a bastion of humanity amid the forest. We might as well be deer, we might as well be bears." Donnie broke the spell cast by Roosevelt, his voice booming into the microphone once more. "Who are you to talk, old man? You're not even from here. Of course you don't care about outsiders coming in. You're one of them." Roosevelt didn't flinch. He remained standing on the chair. "I care very much about any significant changes to a place that I know, because I know about you too. I know that you've been talking to these trolls. You think you're so smart and so above all this. I know more than you'd ever think, and I'm sick of looking at you and your fake cowboy getup." Roosevelt stepped down and strode in Donnie's direction, stepping over people's legs in the crowded row. "You want to fight me, Donnie? Go on, make a spectacle. Make an impressive showing." About a dozen people stood up and corralled Roosevelt in the other direction. The police chief jogged to the podium, shouldering Joseph out of the way. "Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned. The time is now 8:30 and the fire department needs its space back." Joseph looked at his watch. It was 5 to 8. "Consider this a cooling off period," said the mayor into her microphone before leaning back, hands on belly, and closing her eyes. The chief waved the other cop over. Then he looked at Joseph and Carl. "You two are going with Sergeant DeBoer." She finally pushed through the crowd to meet up with him. "Help these guys get out of here," he said to her. "They're going to need it." People began to shuffle out the doors, but Donnie's crew lingered. One of them lifted up a steel folding chair over his head and began thrusting it in the air to punctuate his words. "Haymaker! Haymaker!" His buddies chimed in, lifting their own chairs. "I got this," said the chief, burrowing toward the noise. Sergeant DeBoer turned to Joseph. "Where are you parked?" "In the back." "Nope, we're not taking you there. People are leaving that way." Joseph and Carl followed her through the side door, down a long white corridor, through security clearances that required her key card, and out one more door to the dark night and her cruiser. "Where are you staying?" "I'm at the North Gateway Inn," said Carl, on the outskirts of town. "That's good. There's a bit of a buffer between here and there." "I'm right down the road," said Joseph. She shook her head. I'm taking you both to the motel. It'll be safer." Carl sat in the front seat beside Sergeant DeBoer. He was a big guy and needed the extra legroom to stretch the knee he'd blown out in his football days. Joseph sat in the back, in the cage, like a criminal. Nobody said anything as they turned on a Schoolcraft and headed south. The silhouettes of pines stood against the charcoal sky. But after a few moments, Joseph leaned forward to the plexiglass near Carl's ear. "We're here to liberate them, huh?" "I was mad, Joseph." "You're saying you're here to liberate us?" "Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. I wasn't going to keep my mouth shut anymore. After all this, all these years of planning and meeting, and Marissa and I are going to move here to this? Screw them. Screw you," screamed Joseph. "The most important moment in the history of our movement, in the history of our planning, and you ruin everything because your feelings are hurt? Your job was to set up the easel, pass out some brochures, and then sit down with your mouth shut. It's my job to communicate. It's my job to put out the fires, and you end up being the one who stands up with a flamethrower and torches the place." He took several deep breaths and then turned to Sergeant DeBoer. "I'm sorry for raising my voice. I'm sorry for what happened tonight, and I'm sorry for any hassle our presence creates for you." She shook her head slightly. "It's my job. I'm actually an outsider myself." She grinned. "I'm from under the bridge, a troll." "So how'd you manage to fit in?" asked Joseph. She squinted from the headlights of a passing truck. "I carry a gun, so it's a little easier." Joseph sighed, sat back, and rubbed his hands. "Let's put that in the brochure, Carl. Maybe tie it to Second Amendment issues. Carrying a gun makes things a little easier." They arrived at the dimly lit 12-room motel. "Take care of yourselves," said Sergeant DeBoer. "Call the station in the morning and we'll arrange to pick you up and take you back to your car." She gave him her business card. "When are you guys going to start moving here anyways? Are we talking 6 months, a year?" "It'll be in waves," said Joseph. He stepped out into the cold parking lot. "But a few of us will arrive real soon." He hesitated. "The end of the month." She nodded, wished them well, and drove off, her taillights like cinders in the dark northern night. On the narrow road under the invisible sky, Brenda thought about the changes that would come to her job, to her life. She knew Lenny would want to prepare thoroughly for this first wave. There'd be late meetings with the mayor, a darkened house when she returned home to Brian every night. She arrived at the Civic Center, the unlit windows and abandoned lot like the Midway after it left town each summer, without a trace. She circled the building to be sure nobody was lingering, and then pulled up toward Joseph's car. In the back lot near a dumpster slumped a red Honda, its back window smashed in, and all 4 tires slashed. She slowed to a stop and stared at the Indiana license plate. A giveaway, she muttered. Asphalt glass reflected a street lamp, like the stars, like the lake reflecting stars. A haymaker, in addition to originally being a name for a type of farming equipment, a haymaker is a type of punch. It's an all or nothing knockout blow, kind of wildly thrown power punch. And like I said, it's wild and it's unwieldy, but it's thrown with maximum power. And if it connects, you're probably going to win the fight. You're probably going to knock them out quickly. And if you throw a haymaker and you miss, then you're exposed. You've left yourself open to a counterpunch. You could go from being the victor to being flat on your back real quickly. So what's happening at this point in the book is that the freedom community is throwing their haymaker. And kind of what the rest of the book deals with is whether or not the blow connects or whether they miss, and the town strikes back in a way with its own right hook. I'm going to read just one more short section because I said in that section how the group was going to start arriving at the end of the month. Well, that month is October. So the end of the month is Halloween. And what's happening at this point in the book is kind of like we did when I was a kid. The elementary school on Halloween is having a special kind of thing in the afternoon where all the kids are in their costumes, and as are the teachers, and they are going to go on a little parade through the main street of the town. It's called the Monster March. And Brenda DeBoer, the police officer from that last scene, is kind of slowly leading the way in her police cruiser to make sure there are no other traffic or anything, and people are outside waving to the kids and things like that. So that sets the scene here. I should also say that also with them with the school principal is the mascot of Haymaker High School. They're the Haymaker Huskies. So Harry Husky is there, which is it's a teenage boy named Charlie Henke who is dressed up in the big husky outfit. Dog outfit. The Monster March continued north. Knights, football players, and Egyptian queens roamed past houses decorated in orange lights with fake tombstones and cobwebs. Residents clapped and cheered. Brenda turned onto Marquette with Harry Husky, the principal, and the kindergartners right behind. Patrons and employees of downtown businesses walked out to the curb to watch the ceremonies and cheer. Above them all, Donnie sat in the open window of his apartment, straddling the sill as he smoked a cigarette under the gray skies. He'd taken the day off and spent the morning lying on the couch, reading a book about iron ore freighters. He'd lain low since the town meeting, watching for any changes to the stump field, workers or bulldozers, and peering with binoculars through the window. Donnie had once enjoyed Halloween the way most kids enjoy Christmas. When he was 12, he and his buddies had managed to trick-or-treat at nearly every house in Haymaker. A couple years later, he gleefully toilet-papered birch trees and smashed pumpkins. Even today, he enjoyed the sight of the Monster March more than he'd admit. When his niece Ash was younger, he used to watch it from street level. In a few more years, when his nephew Patrick John entered kindergarten, he'd do the same for him. But he'd woken up today not even realizing it was Halloween. The date had lost all significance for him, though that was about to change. The rest of Willow Street School twisted around the corner. Eventually, the ghoulish sixth graders made it onto Marquette, accompanied by a low but booming thump of bass. Donnie leaned farther out the window, trying to find the source of the music, and then turned around. It was coming from the opposite direction. At first he thought it might be the marching band, but then on top of the bass came the scraping sound of electric guitar. He recognized the song but couldn't identify it yet. A pickup truck approached from the opposite end of Marquette Street, then another, then another. The drivers of the trucks stretched their left arms out the windows, brandishing American flags. And from each passenger side window, someone waved another flag that Donnie didn't recognize. Men, women, and children filled the beds of the trucks, dancing and singing and waving flags to the rhythm of the song. It blasted from speakers mounted on the lead truck, Neil Young, Rockin' in the Free World. Brenda stopped in the middle of Marquette Street and jumped from the cruiser. People on the street gawked, utterly confused by this other parade headed straight for the Monster March. Principal Rosicki and Miss Hughes stopped dead, and the kindergartners bumped into them before tripping over one another. Harry Husky danced and skipped on, oblivious, performing cartwheels and waving to the people along the sidewalk. Brenda jogged toward the motorcade with her right palm pressed out in front of her. "Hey, stop!" She was as mystified as anyone. The trucks closed in, 10 in all, though only idling now. Behind them rolled a longer string of cars and RVs, all flashing their headlights and honking their horns. The music continued to roar. Twisted Sister now, we're not gonna take it. People waved the flags to the beat of the song, both the American flags and these other, which were dark blue and red with a white outline of a bear. And then, to Brenda's shock, another mascot emerged, a furry black bear with a kind of Yankee Doodle hat atop his head. He waved to the crowd and especially to the school children who stood there, thunderstruck. Even the sixth graders looked to their teachers for reassurance. Principal Rosicki ran forward, stood beside Brenda and shouted at the trucks, "Turn around, get out of here, this is a parade!" The people ignored him. They continued waving the flags and screaming, "Woo!" as if at a concert. Brenda then recognized Carl Farmer, standing in the bed of the lead truck. He wore a Chicago Blackhawks jersey and was singing at the top of his lungs, pumping his right fist in the air. A tall, thin man with a gray mustache stepped past Carl and climbed onto the roof of the truck. He was maybe in his early 60s with a ball cap, a long gray ponytail, and a gold hoop earring. He held an American flag in one hand and the bear flag in the other, and then, looming over the street, crossed the flagpoles above his head in an X. Brenda knew in an instant it was their leader. It was Gorman Tate. "What are you doing?" she yelled. By now, those shop owners and their employees who had stood and watched the march from the sidewalk had wandered into the street and clustered into the no man's land between the two parades. Tim Rogers, owner of the Venison, was there. So was Rita Gumpert. Brenda spoke directly to Gorman. "You can't do this. You need permission. You need a license." "That'll change," he said, smiling down at her. When people describe something as happening in a blur, they mean something like this. Donnie, sprinting out from behind the flower shop, zeroing in on the lead truck, and Brenda, in a moment of trained reflex, seeing him from the corner of her eye, catching him and tackling him to the ground. Pain shot through her left arm. Her humerus had snapped. "Get out of here, Donnie! Free country!" he yelled. "That's right," said Gorman, smiling from his perch. "Free country. Maybe you should be on our side, brother." "Go stab yourself," said Donnie, pulling himself free from Brenda. "Go kill yourself and stab yourself." Brenda climbed to one knee but stopped there. She felt lightheaded with pain. When she closed her eyes, everything looked white instead of black. Some members of the Libertarian Parade took Donnie's words and made them a chant. "Free country, free country." Principal Rosicki and Tim Rogers held him back now, each grasping one tattooed arm. Donnie kept screaming, "God's mercy on you, swine." Brenda reached for her portable with her right hand, her left hanging limp at her side, and called for backup. The black bear mascot with the Yankee Doodle hat strode past her and began to playfully shadowbox with Harry Husky. Charlie, from beneath his mask, shoved the bear, sending him sprawling on his back so that the bear's head rolled a few feet down the road. There lay Lee Mooneyham. "What are you doing?" yelled Lee. He stood up, a man's head with a bear's body, and tackled Harry Husky. A kindergartner dressed as a pumpkin screamed, and soon many young kids who weren't already in tears began to cry. Townspeople surrounded the lead truck, pointing and shouting. Sirens sounded in the distance, barely audible under music pounding from the speakers. Guns N' Roses now, Paradise City. And that's the end of year one in the book. So it's divided into 3 years as you sort of see as the freedom community has its initial waves and tries to establish roots as kind of leading up to an election. So in just a minute, if anyone has any questions, we can kind of open it up to a Q&A, but I thought before I finish, I'll kind of end where I began. I was telling you about this sort of real life inspiration for some of this with the Free State Project and the Free Town Project. And when I was initially coming up with ideas for this, I was researching those groups a lot and going on their websites. It was really just to figure out the logistics of how they were trying to do it and what were their beliefs, what did they feel more strongly about, what was some of the language they would use in their communications. But once I got rolling with the novel, I didn't want to look at any of that anymore because I didn't want it to influence the fictional version that I was creating. And this might sound phony, but after working on it for so many years, a part of me almost convinced myself that like this was the original, you know what I mean? That there wasn't something that it was based on. And it's only recently that I kind of went back recently to see how did those real life sort of social, political experiments turn out. And for the most part, the town of Grafton kind of resisted the influx of people and the rapid changes that were proposed. And without spoiling anything for anyone who's interested in reading it, Haymaker, and hasn't done so, I was stunned at sort of, in some ways, how similar the fate of that town kind of was to the fate of my own fictional town. But kind of to my amazement, the Free State Project has persisted, and I guess it almost died off around 2007, but then it made a comeback. And in an article from just about 2 months ago in the Concord Monitor in Concord, New Hampshire, the title reads, Free State Project nears 20,000 signers, setting stage for libertarian influx. So I thought, we'll see what happens. Hopefully there's not some Donnie Sarver type to throw 20,000 punches and start 20,000 fistfights with 20,000 visitors. Again, thank you so much for coming out tonight and hearing me out. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.